Hello everybody, this is Mr. Lawback. In this video we are going to go over the impacts and the results by and for women, blacks, and Native Americans in the Revolutionary War. First we'll talk about women in the Revolutionary War. Both prior to and during the war, groups of women such as the Daughters of Liberty organized to oppose British actions. Before the war, they took direct action by boycotting British goods. During the war, they provided supplies to fighting forces. Some women followed men into the armed camps and worked as cooks and nurses. In a few instances, women fought in battle, either taking their husband's place, as Mary Macaulay, who would become known as a Molly Pitcher, or passing as a man and serving as a soldier, as Deborah Sampson did for a year. Female loyalists also provided support in British troops. The most important contributions of women during the war was maintaining the colonial economy. While fathers, husbands, and sons were away fighting, women ran family farms and businesses. They provided much of the food and clothing necessary for the war effort. The combination of hearing the revolutionary rhetoric and being actively engaged in the struggle influenced how many women viewed their role in society. A new view of their status in society evolved, a change referred to as Republican motherhood. This new role called for educating women so that in the home they could teach their children the value of the new republic and their roles as citizens, especially their boys. This gave women a more active role in shaping the new nation's political life. However, it was still a role carried out in the home, not in public, and it did not imply equality with men. Few people, male or female, advocated for full equality at this time in history. Despite their contributions, women continued in their second-class status. Unsuccessful were pleas such as those of Abigail Adams to her husband John, where she wrote, "I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors." She wrote this when Adams was off at the Second Continental Congress and was participating in the writing of the Declaration of Independence. Abigail Adams and John Adams corresponded via letters over 1,100 times during their relationship. Another very notable contributor to the American Revolution was Betsy Ross. Betsy Ross is credited with sewing the first United States flag, a symbol of patriotism. Ross is often celebrated as the woman who helped George Washington finish the design. During the Revolutionary War, thousands of Black Americans jumped into the war on both sides of the conflict. But unlike their white counterparts, they weren't just fighting for independence or to maintain British control. In a time when the vast majority of African Americans lived in bondage, their forced labor fueled the economy of the colonies. Most took up arms hoping to be freed from their literal shackles of chattel slavery. By 1775, more than 500,000 African Americans, most of them enslaved, lived throughout the 13 colonies. At first, the Continental Congress banned blacks from serving in the military under George Washington. However, the 1st Rhode Island Regiment, the 1st Continental Army unit largely comprised of Black New Englanders, showcased African American skills as soldiers and commitment to their brethren on the battlefield. In the late 1770s, dwindling manpower forced George Washington to reconsider his original decision to ban Black people from the Continental Army. So in 1778, a Rhode Island legislature action declared that both free and enslaved Black people could serve. To attract the latter, the Patriots promised freedom at the end of service. Historians estimate that between 5,000 and 8,000 African-descended people participated in the Revolution on the Patriot side, and that upwards of 20,000 served on the British side. Most Black soldiers were scattered throughout the Continental Army in integrated infantry regiments, where they were often assigned to support roles such as wagoners, cooks, waiters, or artisans. African Americans also served as gunners and in the Continental Navy during the Revolution. Crispus Attucks, whom you may remember from the Boston Massacre, who was killed, is credited by many historians as the first man to die for the rebellion, became a symbol of Black American patriotism and sacrifice. In 1775, at least 10 to 15 black soldiers, including some slaves, fought against the British at the battles of Lexington and Bunker Hill. Two of these men, Salem Poor and Peter Salem, earned special distinction for their bravery. On November 7, 1775, British Lord Dunmore issued a proclamation that established martial law and offered freedom to slaves who would leave patriotic owners and join the British Army. In 1779, Sir Henry Clinton issued the Philipsburg Proclamation. In effect, it expanded Dunmore's proclamation to include any rebel slave who could escape, whether they were ready to serve for the British or not, anywhere in the colonies. This proclamation backfired, however, because it did not discourage rebellion, but further angered many white wealthy patriots because it reflected an assault on their rights as a property owner, that by offering freedom to slaves, the British were depriving them of their enslaved property. Throughout the war, many blacks fought with extraordinary bravery and skill on both sides. For some slaves turned soldiers, the Revolution promise of liberty became a reality. But despite the Patriots' lofty rhetoric about liberty and justice for all, America's war for independence didn't herald widespread emancipation for enslaved people of color. Native Americans. Many Native American tribes fought in the Revolutionary War. The majority of these tribes fought for the British, but a few fought for the Americans. There had already been a lot of tension between the colonists and most Native Americans, so it was natural for the Native Americans to side with the British, more likely. Plus, very few colonists believed that the idea of liberty and equality applied to American Indians. However, many of these tribes tried to remain neutral in the early phase of the war, but when some of them came under attack by American militia, they decided to side with the British. The Iroquois Confederacy, an alliance of 6 Native American nations in New York, was divided by the Revolutionary War. 2 of the nations, the Oneida and the Tuscarora, chose to side with the Americans, while the other nations, including the Mohawk, fought with the British. Now for a big takeaway. Blacks, women, and Native Americans did not see large gains and improvement in American society after the Revolutionary War. Basically, their status in American society reverted back to what it was prior to the war, and in some cases even got worse.